But today I want to talk about APIs. Who here has already developed an HTTP API? Good, so most of you. And in general, when you develop your first HTTP API, you need to solve a lot of issues. You need to think about the entities, about the boundaries, about the domain, and then you need to think about the rest of how should I do a post or a put, or perhaps use a patch, and what's the correct semantics, and what return codes should I return in this case, 201, 200, lots and lots of questions. Does it talk to you? You face those issues? Good. And when you are facing all those issues, it's easy to forget about like the next version. So when the business comes to you and say, hey, let's do V2, then you might look like this. So my idea in this talk is to give you a few tips and tricks so that when it happens, you won't have this reaction. You would be like better off. Great. So imagine this is the initial situation, right? Everybody has the same situation. You have your upstream, and then you have a couple of endpoints, and then you have users. So first, you all lied, because probably you have something in between. And what I'm telling you is, use an API gateway, it will solve all your problems. I'm a developer advocate, right? So I need to provide a solution that solves all your problems. But most of you will tell me, no, that's not true. We already have something, it's called a reverse proxy. So why can't reverse proxy solve all my problems? Okay, so I will explain it a bit. As I mentioned, I've been a long time in IT, but before then, when I was only a student, because I didn't study IT, I didn't study computer science, I studied architecture, yes, like real architecture. I was already playing with HTML. So before 2000. I wouldn't say some of you weren't born at that time, but close. And at the time, it was a very interesting time. Basically, you already had HTML. You already had images. A couple of years before, you had no images. That was only like plain text. You had audio files. So the good thing is that everybody loved to put a MIDI file at the root of their site. And when you open the web page, it started playing a stupid music. Who did it? The user experience was horrible, right? But we did it because we could. There were no CSS. So if you had to like create nice buttons, you had to use a table with different colors. That was really great developer experience as well. And well, I won't comment on the last. It might be a good thing for some of you, a bad thing, and no JavaScript either. And so at the time, I didn't think about it too much. But basically, I just put my file somewhere, and there was something that served them, a web server. I assume at the time it was Apache because, well, it was free. But to be honest, I don't know because I mean, at the time, I didn't think about it. And so we serve static content. But the problem of static content is, well, it's static. We want to do crazy stuff. We want to like display the date of the day and the time. Completely useless again, but it's fun. More interesting stuff, we want to display the last updated time of the page, which is much more interesting. So somebody decided, okay, we will create a script that will generate the HTML. And at the time, the scripts were written in Perl, and also we created CGI scripts in Perl. But I don't know if you know Perl. I didn't, and I still don't. But actually, creating the page is hard, but maintaining the page is even harder because you need to read the whole program to understand how the page would look like. And so what we did, or at least what somebody thought about, is let's create a language that will actually like just output the HTML and in some places render something dynamically. And it was the birth of PHP. So now they renamed it to a hypertext preprocessor, but at the time, PHP meant personal homepage. Because that's what people did. They did their personal homepage with PHP. But this thing, this World Wide Web, became more and more used, and not only by geeks or by developers, but by companies. Companies started to think, oh, perhaps there is something we need to do. And so they started to have their own website. And if your own personal website is down, it's not a problem. Nobody cares but you and perhaps your few users. But if you are a company, you have this image. You want your website to be always up. And so the web server stopped just serving content, whether it was static or dynamic. We added a new layer of web server that did load balancing and fell over. And it didn't stop there, because actually we had more and more success with the internet. So we had like intranet, extranets, internets, whatever. And so the nodes that previously were all the same, now they were different. And so this second layer, or this first layer of web serving, actually had not only to do load balancing among the same nodes, but routing across different nodes. And so that's the evolution of the web server. Serving static content, then serving dynamic content, and finally load balancing and then routing. So we went through several stages. And if you look at it from an architecture perspective, then it's very easy to see, oh, now I have a single point of entry. We will put more responsibilities, more capabilities. We will add authentication, authorization, caching, whatever. And in parallel, we had to exchange data with other organizations. So at the beginning, when I started, when you wanted to exchange data with a provider or with a customer, you just sent a file to an FTP folder. On the other side, there was a batch job, watching the folder, reading the data, doing the stuff, and when it was done, it renamed the file in .done. That was the early stages. It's good, it worked, but the thing is, this is asynchronous. You need to wait for the batch to run, and the batch was like scheduled every hour, every day, whatever. But today we need like synchronous data integration. We want to be sure that the data is actually read and integrated in real time. And if we work across different companies, there is a high chance that our stack, our tech stack, won't be the same. So the only thing that we can rely on is the most basic brick is HTTP. And so that's the beginning of the APIs. And so back to my initial thing. What's the difference between a reverse proxy and an API gateway? Both can do the same thing. I believe the API gateway can do a bit more anyway. But why don't you use a reverse proxy? Well, my opinion on that, and I know not everybody has the same opinion, is that a reverse proxy is just a technical layer. For example, a reverse proxy has rate limiting capability because you don't want to be DDoSed. So you want to limit the number of requests any client can send you. An API gateway, however, needs to be smart. it cannot apply the same rule to every client because some of the clients might have paid a fee to have a higher rate. And then that's the time when you start putting business logic into your reverse proxy. And for me, that's the main differentiator, is a reverse proxy is just a technical layer, whereas when you start putting business logic into the reverse proxy, it should become an API gateway. Another example. Reverse proxy were designed at a time where downtime was not an issue. I don't know if you remember, but we used to have a static page saying, hey, come back in a few minutes. We are down for the moment, we are doing an upgrade. Nowadays, nobody understands it but us. Your family, people who are not in IT, they are using Google, they are using Amazon, they are using Facebook. Those services are never down. So it's not possible nowadays to say, hey, we will back in a few minutes. If you put that, people will leave, won't understand, and will leave. They won't come back ever. So you cannot have a downtime. And reverse proxies were designed at a time where it was okay. The problem is that for this reason, if you want to change the configuration of a reverse proxy, you need to bring it down most of the time. So API gateway means business logic and dynamic configuration changes. There are lots of API gateway on the market. I work on the Apache APISIX one, hence the t-shirt, but you have the choice. The demo that I will show you is with Apache APISIX, but of course it should apply with any of the others. And here I'm not even mentioning the cloud-based one. So all of those, you can use them on-premise. So just a couple of words about Apache APISIX. Well, it's an Apache project, meaning it's managed by the Apache Foundation, meaning there is not one single company behind it. You can work on the project, become a committer. That's how it works. It's on a per committer basis, not on a per company basis. It uses Nginx. Yes. I believe everybody knows Nginx reverse proxy, very solid, very good one. Then we have OpenResty. And OpenResty, as I mentioned, is a layer. Actually, it's a Lua layer, like Lua as in the programming language, that allows you to change the configuration of Nginx dynamically without switching it off and on again. Then you've got APISIX, and you've got lots and lots of out-of-the-box plugins. So Apache APISIX is a plugin-based solution. Now, let's get back to my initial issue. I told you the API gateway will solve all your problems. That's what I promised you. So first thing is I will introduce the API gateway. At this stage, I will start having a demo, so please pray for the demo gods to be with me. I have created a project, so I will start it, Docker, and then I will explain it while it starts. Docker compose up. I will make it a bit bigger. And here I have my project. So basically, I'm sorry for the ratio, but we didn't manage to get it better. Is it good? Is it big enough, or should I make it bigger? No, it's good, thanks. Well, you are young people, that's fine. So here you have Apache APISIX, which is the API gateway. APISIX stores by default its configuration in etcd, which is a key value store that you probably know because it's used by Kubernetes, so it's a distributed key value store. Then I have the APISIX dashboard. Then I want to monitor everything, so I have Prometheus and Grafana to have the dashboard. And here I have my old API. That's the old API that I want to migrate. And normally I shouldn't have, but it's Docker Compose, so for me it's easier. I have also my new API. So how do they look like? Well, given it's a Java conference, I've created my old API with Spring Boot and Java. Everybody knows Java and Spring Boot? Yes. And the new API is much better, and I don't see it here, so I need to go there. new API is much better. As I mentioned, it's Kotlin. I love Kotlin. So it's much better. And now I will just try it. Curl local host 8082, and I hope it works. I hope everything has started. Let's try it. And I will say hello, 8081, sorry. Hello? Yes. Great. I still am able to create an hello world. And the version with Kotlin is much better, as you will see. Good. Much better, right? So my idea is to move from the old API to the new API without breaking too many things. I will go through the API gateway. So if I go through the API gateway right now, this is what happens. Why? Because the API gateway is not configured. So I need to configure it. With Apache APISIX, we can use API calls to change the configuration. So here, I'm not running curl directly. I'm using Docker to run a curl image, just so that you can use it as well, even if you don't have curl installed. So if the project is on GitHub, as long as you have Docker, you can use the project and do it at home. So here is a dedicated route. So I will have this new route with ID 1. It's a put because I create something, and because changing the configuration of the API gateway is actually very sensitive, I need to somehow be authenticated or at least to pass an API key. So there are multiple ways to secure your Apache APISIX configuration. Here, I'm using the default API key, which is very bad. You should never do that. But for the demo, it's good enough. Then I need to pass a couple of data attributes. The first is the name. It's optional, but at least you will know what it is about. The second and the third is the methods and the URI. So basically, as soon as I will send a request that matches both, then APISIX will say, oh, it's this route, and then it will forward the request to this upstream. The upstream right now is the old API. And because, as I mentioned, I want everything to be monitored, I will have an additional plugin. As I mentioned, Apache APISIX is plugin-based, so I will add the Prometheus plugin. If I run this, and now I curl again, it works. Well, I'm back at square one, but at least it works. But now everything is ready, so I can continue doing my stuff. Okay, great. This is great as a stepping stone. Now we want to version the API. So what we need to do is actually we need to create an additional route that goes to the exact same upstream, but that introduces versioning. Good? Let's do it. I could do exactly the same as before, but actually what I want is I want to have some abstractions. The idea of an upstream is an abstraction. I want to reuse it in multiple configurations. So here, I will first create the upstream, and I use another route for that, namely upstream's route. It's a new one. The API key, you know about it. I put because I created. And so I do the same as before, only this time I first create the upstream. Let's create the upstream. Great. And also, I want every route to be monitored. I don't want to ask explicitly like users to say, hey, when you create this route, you need to think that it's monitored. So I will create a plugin configuration that applies to every route, because I want everything to be monitored. And here, this is the global rule route. And finally, I will create the version route. So here, I will version with the path. There are multiple ways to version. You can version with the path, you can version with query parameters, you can query with headers, you can version with headers. All of them are supported, but here the path is the easiest way for the demo. So now I create the get that matches v1/hello whatever. I reference the upstream ID that I created in the step before, and I don't want to forget something very important. I want to first remove the v1 prefix. Because if I just forward it as it is, I will forward v1/hello to the upstream, and the upstream only knows about hello, it doesn't know about v1. So I need to rewrite the request. And so for this, I have another plugin called proxy rewrite. And so it's a regex. So I say, if you receive something v1 something, then you just use something. And now I can curl again with v1. Good. So now I have two routes. Let's see, here I'm using the basic stuff, like the API, but also if you don't want to use APIs, we have a dashboard. I let you guess the password, which I didn't change because I'm super lazy. Okay, so here you can see I have my two routes. At any point, I can check the configuration. I can change directly the configuration here. For example, I can change it here, and it's directly reflected. And here, I have created one single upstream that I use only in the second route because the first route is self-contained. Good. That's the dashboard. Now we face another problem. If at this point, we let it like this, what will lazy developers do? They will continue using the inversion route because you need to type more characters. And, well, I don't want to change something that works. Makes sense, right? So we need to tell people, hey, stop using that. The problem is we don't know them. We don't know who is using our API. We never asked for subscription because we were super happy. Hey, let's publish our API. So we need to rely on the HTTP protocol. And for that, we'll just return a 301. And then we'll pass the information that this route doesn't exist anymore. You should use another route that will work. Guess what? It's super easy. So here, I'm updating the first route. I'm using the patch verb because I just update it, and I update just this port. And I will say I will add a plugin that redirects. If it's like, if I'm using this inversion route, I will redirect to v1 whatever I asked for. Good. So now let's use it. So I will curl. I will like make it verbose. Curl, local host 9080/hello. And it tells me move permanently. And more importantly, it tells me /v1/hello. You should use it. And of course, it also works if I say, hey, John. It tells me, oh, you should go there. So that's also a lesson for you who are not providing APIs, but who are consuming APIs. You should always, always monitor your clients. Otherwise, everything will break. Oh, but you tell me that's not an issue. We are smart developers, which I believe. We are doing auto-follow. Oh, curl doesn't work like this. We are doing auto-follow. it works magically. We don't need to update anything. Well, here you just double your number of requests. First one, 301, second one. So still, you need to monitor your requests when you are consuming APIs. That's pretty good, but actually, my main problem, I don't know my users. So I need to rely on HTTP. So perhaps we can do something. We can make people register. Who here likes to register? Why? You don't want to give your emails to marketing managers who decide to spam you every day? I wonder why. Well, I don't like it neither. But who here likes free stuff? Yeah. So we can be smart and trying to promise something and say, okay, you give me your email and we give you unlimited calls. You can still use our API if you don't give your email, but you will only be limited. That works. Unfortunately, Apache APISIX doesn't have anything for that. So I had to create my own plugin in Lua. Who here is a Lua developer? Nobody? Nobody. Cool, I can show the code then. Because I'm not a Lua developer either. So basically, the code is not important. What I did is I copy-pasted code from the connection limit. So something that does exactly the same. I just added code that says, okay, if you are authenticated with a certain plugin called keyauth, which I will do afterwards, then you just return, you don't continue the logic. It's pretty bad code probably, but it works, so it's good. Okay, let's try it. So I will run this plugin here. So this is how I call the plugin. It's, again, very similar to the auth limit plugin. Oh, sorry. Oh, I didn't show you the code, even better. Okay, and now I will call the view 1. I will remove John because now you understood how good a developer I am. And now I'm limited, I'm rate limited. Good. So now I understand that I want to register, and so I will register. But there is no way to register. I mean, it's just a dummy link. So there are multiple ways to create what APISIX called consumers. I will use the simplest way possible because, again, it's for a demo. You can use whatever way you want. I will create a consumer with the username John Doe, and the plugin that I'm using is keyauth. And basically, keyauth will search for a header called API key. And in this case, if it finds a header API key, and if the value is my key, then it will tell, hey, you are John Doe. So if I run this one, and we can check that actually the consumer has been created. Now I have a John Doe here. And if we curl, passing a header API key, and with name value my key, I subscribe, and now I'm authenticated as John Doe, so I have unlimited calls. And now you've got one more email, but don't tell your marketing manager. Good. So now I'm pretty sure about myself. I want to deploy V2, right? But before deploying it, I need to test it. Who does unit testing? Not that many people. Integration testing? Not that many people either. Testing in production? Hey, you are all laughing, but everybody tests in production at some point. Everybody tests in production because even if you are doing the best integration testing framework ever, there is production load that won't match any of your tests. And actually, we had this issue in one of my previous projects. We wanted to do some integration testing with the new version of the app, but we couldn't get a hold of the production load. It's very, very hard. Well, at least it was. But nowadays, what we can do is we have an API gateway. So we can deploy V2 and then just mirror the load that goes to the V1 and monitor V2 and V1 response codes. And they should follow the same curve. If you've got, I don't know, more 500 on the V2, then probably there is something problematic and you can delay deploying until you fixed it. So by default, every plugin has a priority. And so it's very easy for Apache APISIX to say, I will execute the plugins in their order. The problem before, like when I joined 1 year ago, is it was hard-coded and you couldn't change it. And so what happened is first, you had the proxy mirror, which duplicated the loads, and then you had the removal of the prefix v1. So basically what v2 received, it was v1/hello. And so 404. So now you can finally change the priority of the plugins. So now I have changed the priority of the proxy rewrite so that it runs before the proxy mirror, which is very good. So now first you remove the prefix and then you duplicate the load. I don't know if I run it, so I would run it again. And now I need to do it a couple of times. And I will say hello, John, again. No, this time it will be Jane. Okay, again, some load, because now I want to monitor. So you remember, I've monitored all my routes without being explicit because it's a global rule. So now I can check on my Grafana dashboard. And here I have everything. So here, the beginning is the standard Apache APISIX dashboard in Grafana. I've added myself those two widgets. Who had to add widgets to Grafana? Who here has already changed the configuration of Grafana? You are very happy people. It's a mess. Anyway, here we can see this is the time where we can check the curves and how they look like. So of course, the scale is not the same, but here we see this curve. We see here the green curve as well. They look alike. Here we have this yellow line. Here we have this yellow line. They look about the same. Of course, again, it's a demo. You should do it in a couple of hours to check that they are really the same. Then you could have better monitoring that say, oh, there is a 5% difference, everything is fine, or no, it's not fine. But here, it looks the same. I say, okay, it's good enough. I can continue. So the next step is canary release. You can do canary release. Should I explain canary release? Okay, so if you are doing high-level production, if you don't know every customer, so you are Google or Amazon or Facebook and whatever, you cannot just say, hey, I deploy a version, and if you deploy a bug, everybody is impacted at once, and it's hell. You want only that a few selected people use the new version. And then you can really monitor carefully this fraction of the population. And again, if you have the same curves, then it means everything is okay. With the previous one, what we did is we discarded the response. We just look at the HTTP status code, but the client didn't know about the response of the V2. Here, what we are saying, it's one step further. We will use the response of the V2 for a selected people. And it can be depending on HTTP header, it can depend on the geography, it can depend on, let's say, 5%. Here, I will use 50%, so you can see. So the demo, again, it's a demo, but depending on your needs, in general, you will start with 5%, then go on 10, 20, 50, until everything is good. So I will remove the configuration. So first, I need to create the V2 upstream. Then I need to remove the proxy Myra plugin. I don't need anymore, and I need the traffic split plugin. So here I will do the same, but this time I have 50-50% chances of hitting the V2, even though I call the V1. So let's do it. Yes, so it starts, 2, 2, 2. So I already about 50% chance. Again, everything works all right. Everything is cool. We can go further. We can create the V2. And everything is good. Now we can call the V2 explicitly. Final step. We have multiple versions of the API. And the more versions you have, the more maintenance costs you need to spend. So we want to restrict the number of versions to 2, 3, 4, depending on what you want to support. But we cannot just say, hey, it doesn't work anymore. But even though we have the emails normally. There is no HTTP for that, but there is an IETF draft. And it's called deprecation. We want to deprecate the API. And for that, the IETF draft can help us. So there is the header called deprecation, which contains either a Boolean or a date. For the demo, again, I use a Boolean because I'm super lazy, but you should set a date. You don't want your client to call you and suddenly they discover, oh, it's deprecated. You want to warn them. And again, as a consumer, you should look for new headers. So you should monitor your API consumption to look for new headers. And then there is a link header that tells, hey, this is the new place the endpoint is located at. And finally, saying something is deprecated, it's still there. So people will still be using it. So if you want to go the extra miles, you can also tell them, hey, at this date, we will remove the endpoint altogether. Again, it's another header called sunset. Well, pretty good. So we just need to change the headers. So I have the deprecation header, as I mentioned, a Boolean, not a great ID, and the link. And here in the link, I'm using Nginx variables because, as I mentioned, APISIX is based on Nginx, and we can use them. Great, and now if I call v1, thanks, and we make it verbose, then we can see it's deprecated true, and here is the stuff that you should call. Good, I think that at this point, the next step is just to relax. So normally at this point, when the business comes for V3, it should be like a walk in the park. So either you can use the tips and tricks as an afterthought, like I've shown you, or you can use them like in advance, because now you know about them. So for your next API, perhaps you can use them to make your life much, much easier. Thanks for your attention. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Mastodon, but it seems that it's not popular here. You can read my blog. If you want to check the codes, please feel free. It's on GitHub. Feel free to store it, to clone it, to make issues, whatever. Just one thing, I always use the latest version of the product, so I force push regularly. So just be like aware that you won't be able to easily get it back. And if I got you interested in Apache APISIX, please have a look. Apache project, free forever, and open source. Thanks a lot.